I think there's still this sort of thought out there that you're never going to find anything that's like as fulfilling as a career in academia. And that's just not true. There's so much interesting stuff out there, and it's all about what fills your cup.
Welcome to Physicists in the Wild. My name is Aggie Branczyk. In this series, we chat with physicists who pursued careers outside of academia. In this episode, we chat with Emily Petroff, who did her Ph.D. in astrophysics and is now the Associate Director for Strategic Partnerships Grants and Awards at Perimeter Institute.
I started at Perimeter about 8 months ago, and I was on a contract doing only partnerships. But then that role has kind of grown to this associate directorship, where now I work under sort of the umbrella of what we would call government relations and external affairs, how we interact externally, how we are perceived externally, and how we, increase Canada's research capacity as an independent, high-performing research institute.
Would you be able to describe your typical day?
Yeah, I typically break down my week into like my 5 buckets of work that I work on: government relations, partnerships, grants, awards, and reporting. Mm-hmm. And there's always something under each of those things. Half of my job is liaising with people internally within the building, figuring out what they need from external partners, figuring out what support they need in terms of writing grants, or if they have to submit reports for grants. Liaising with our communications team to make sure that we're putting out the right messages that kind of align with what we promise or what we communicate to our government stakeholders in funding proposals. And then half of my work is external focus. So bringing visitors into Perimeter, bringing government dignitaries, bringing ambassadors, bringing partners, and talking to our government stakeholders on a pretty regular basis to make sure that they're getting what they need from us in terms of reports or, information or data, and that we're fully understanding, what we are supposed to be delivering to them. I spend a lot of time talking to people, just trying to understand what's going on, what we should be highlighting. But then I also spend a lot of time writing. I write like reports, I edit grants, I, write briefs for the government. I will write partnership documents and memoranda of understanding. So a lot of writing, a lot of talking.
What skills would you say are needed for your job?
Communication is the biggest one. Just being able to communicate to different audiences and kind of meet them where they're at is critically important. Be that talking to a researcher in the building about their research and really being able to meet them on that technical level, or talking to government you may be talking to someone who has never taken a physics class, and they don't really know what an Institute of Theoretical Physics even does. And so, meeting them at their level and talking about why what we're doing is important for the country, is important for the province. I'd say time management is like possibly my most important skill. Being able to sort of budget time, allocate the right time to complete the right task. Juggling deadlines is really critical for me because I operate on so many different fronts. Technical writing is really important. What do I mean by technical writing? I mean, you're still talking about technical topics, but for maybe a more general audience, and being able to communicate what it is we're doing without selling our scientists short. Mm-hmm. But being able to put it in such a way that a general audience can understand. Still, I still use a lot of my physics background, and I find that I, more than I expected at Perimeter, end up kind of revisiting like my quantum mechanics notes from undergrad. But for the most part, I'd say communication, organization, time management.
How did you get into physics?
I think I've always been interested in astronomy. And everyone told me that to be an astronomer, you had to do an undergraduate in physics. So I, spent a lot of time in my high school years, in my teenage years, trying to get better at physics and explore physics. And kind of along the way, I realized that physics was also really fun. It wasn't something that I had known about before. Found that I really enjoyed it. I did my undergraduate in physics. during my undergraduate, I really wanted to do research. I thought it sounded like a super fun career. It just seemed like such a natural match with my skills. And one of my undergraduate research projects was with a professor at my college who took me to Australia for a couple of research projects to work with the Parkes telescope in the summer between the courses. And I absolutely fell in love with Australia. I fell in love with radio astronomy. And during that time, I got linked up with Matthew Bales, who ended up offering me a PhD position in his group and, bringing me to Australia full time for grad school.
When you were doing your PhD, were you planning to continue a career in academia?
I definitely was. Yeah, I had such a fun time doing my PhD. Like, I really loved research, so it was like such a fun experience. I fully intended to continue on the academic track and get a faculty job. The more senior you get in research, the more you realize that, like, when you were doing your PhD was like the most fun you were ever going to have. And it wasn't until a couple of postdocs in that I decided to kind of make the pivot to a research adjacent, or I would call it academic adjacent kind of career.
How did you decide which kind of industry to go into?
It was a little serendipitous, which I feel like is sort of the thread in my entire career. But I knew that I didn't want to continue in academia. Like, I'd done a couple of postdocs. I found myself less and less excited about faculty jobs. I did a faculty job search, or like faculty job round. I interviewed, and I just found myself not getting excited the way I kind of expected to, and realized maybe there are things about research that I really like, but like, this clearly is not totally fulfilling for me, or I'm just kind of not quite hitting my stride in terms of feeling like a faculty job is the right move. And I honestly had no idea what I wanted to do next. It was like a real crisis of conscience. I feel like a lot of people go through this, and it's not something that people talk about all that often. I find that, I don't know, I found that I had my entire identity wrapped up in being a researcher, being a physicist, being an academic. And it was really painful for me to try to separate that from like who I was as a person, and think about what else am I good at, what else would make me happy. It was a really hard time to decide what I wanted to do. And I was doing career coaching. I was looking around. I knew I wanted to leave academia, but I just, everyone said like, oh, I do data science, or I went into the financial sector. None of that really sparked an interest for me. To me, the saddest part of leaving academia was leaving the community of researchers and sort of working with physicists, working with academics. And when I was sort of going through this whole crisis, I met someone who was acting as a project manager for a large research collaboration. And he had a PhD in astrophysics, and he had gone on to do a couple of management roles. And now he was a project manager for a big research project in Canada. And I talked to him, I listened to what he was doing, and I said, I got really excited. I thought, like, these are all the things that I like doing about research. I like organizing things. I like managing people. I like facilitating research. I don't necessarily need to be the one writing the papers. And you still get to work with academics. So I thought like, okay, maybe research project manager is what I really want to do. And, actually I was very fortunate that this person who I networked with and who, I really hit it off with, ended up offering me a job to be an assistant project manager with the CHIME telescope in Canada. So that's how I ended up in Canada, and made the shift, I think, from pure research to at least project management of research projects.
How was it that you actually got to your current position at Perimeter?
Yeah, it was kind of, again, very much serendipity. I always feel like I want to explore more of what's out there, and I always want to learn from people who have done it. My kind of approach to networking has always been find someone who is doing what you want to do in 5 or 10 years and just like ask to chat with them. I was living in Waterloo while I was working for CHIME. I was working remote throughout the pandemic. And I saw that Perimeter got a new COO during the pandemic. So our new chief operating officer, Paul Smith, he did a PhD in physical chemistry. He did a postdoc, and then he went into research management at Xerox. And he kind of climbed the corporate ladder there and became corporate executive at Xerox before moving to Perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that kind of career and I said, like, that's actually like very close to what I would love to do. Someday I could be a director, a chief operating officer, or something like that. So I just I emailed him and just said, like, hey, I'm, living and working in Waterloo. I'd love to chat with you sometime just to hear about, how you did it. And I want to learn more about your career. And so I sat down with him for like a half-hour meeting. And it was really just I just really wanted to pick his brain. And building that relationship kind of ended up translating into when a role opened at Perimeter, that he reached out to me and said, like, actually, you should apply for this. I think like you might be a good fit. So I applied and here I am.
Do you have any advice for current PhD students?
My advice for current PhD students would be to network. Talk to people who are doing things that you think sound interesting, right? Not just in academia or in your research field, but people who are doing things that sound interesting to you, even if they don't have a physics background or don't have a physics PhD. Like if you talk to someone who says like they head up a graphic design company, and you think, oh, that sounds really cool. Like talk to that person and, build a connection with them. I know a lot of people when they're networking to find a job in industry or they're kind of looking to make that jump, if you're networking to get a job, it can be kind of challenging. It can be a little bit difficult to establish that relationship, but like networking out of genuine curiosity for what someone else does, and, just being really interested in the role they have, what it's like, how you could get there, tends to, I find, to be a much more productive networking experience. And I have also found in my own personal career has like paid off more than the sort of cold call, I'm looking for a job kind of networking, which I've also tried to do and found less successful. It's okay to be afraid of leaving academia. Like I was kind of afraid to leave academia. It like really took a lot of kind of soul searching to be comfortable leaving. Because I think that when I started thinking about leaving, I took it as like a value judgment of my abilities, or like whether I was good enough to stay in research or whether I was quitting or I was a failure. And that's not the case. Like I think that that's really important to like build into the whole conversation around careers that you can have with a physics degree. It's like it's not a failure to do something else with your PhD. It's an absolute success. And if it's fulfilling to you and you find it interesting, so much the better. I think there's still this sort of thought out there that you're never going to find anything out in the wild that's like as fulfilling as a career in academia, or as interesting, like you'll never work on as interesting problems ever again or something like that. And that's just not true. There's so much interesting stuff out there, and it's all about what fills your cup.
Thanks so much, Emily. It was a real pleasure to have you as a guest on this show. I think you've had an amazing career, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed listening to your experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much.